I grew up in a small town in West Virginia. I won't share the name of the college I attended, but it was a small university in a little town just 15 minutes from where I grew up. In 2021, I started my freshman year. COVID was still a major factor in the college experience. One of the biggest impacts was on the dorms. Most students didn't stay on campus because of COVID. They rented apartments nearby instead. I wasn't so lucky. I couldn't afford an apartment, so I stayed on campus and drove home on the weekends since it was so close. Still, I wanted the full college experience in the dorms. On my first day, I met my roommate. We had chatted a little over text beforehand because the school had given her my phone number so we could get to know each other. I thought that was a little strange, but she messaged me first and seemed nice. Meeting her in person, she was still nice, but quiet. She carried an air of privilege. One time, while we were talking, she said, "Everyone has their own rooms due to the lack of students. I did last semester, and now, until you joined." I was a little taken aback. I didn't know what to say, so I just changed the subject and kept the conversation going. I told her I lived nearby and would leave for the weekend on Fridays, returning on Monday mornings at 6 a.m. She didn't say much during the weekdays. Most of the time she stayed with her boyfriend in his dorm room. And now comes the creepy part. The first Friday, I packed my bag for the weekend and left. I came back Monday morning at 6 a.m., just like I said I would. I didn't have class until 10 o'clock, so I went back to sleep. I had a thick memory foam mattress, and after lying down for about 10 minutes, I felt the edge of the bed indent. I didn't move. I waited for a minute, barely processing what was happening because I was so tired. Then the mattress went back up. That's when it hit me. Someone had leaned on my bed. I turned around and saw her facing the wall, presumably sleeping, so I tried to brush it off and went back to sleep. The next weekend, I left again and returned at the same time. Again, I just wanted more sleep. Moments after lying down, I felt the mattress indent again, but this time, it wasn't just the edge. The whole side sagged, as if someone was sitting next to me. I didn't move. I lay there frozen, and then I heard them get up. My bed was very high. In fact, I needed a step stool to climb onto it, and I heard them jump off. I held my breath and slowly looked over. She was again lying on her bed, facing the wall. I didn't know what to think. Was I hallucinating from lack of sleep? Was it sleep paralysis? It couldn't be. I could still move. Could someone have gotten into my room? Impossible. We were the only ones with keys. I decided I must be extremely tired and imagining things, so I went back to sleep. When Monday came around, I was really nervous. I walked in and saw her lying down, this time facing my bed. She was asleep, so I climbed into bed and tried to sleep as well. 5 minutes later, I felt my bed indent again. I squeezed my eyes shut as someone sat next to me. My heart pounded. I braced myself to turn around. Then I felt a hand on the back of my neck. My heart sank. I thought I was going to pass out. I didn't move a muscle. They didn't squeeze. They just held my neck. What felt like hours later, I felt them finally get off my bed. I still didn't move. I stayed frozen for a few more moments, terrified, before turning around. She was facing the wall, sleeping, but I didn't care. I left the room immediately and called my mom. I didn't go to class. I told my mom everything, and she reported it to the school. I was allowed to switch rooms. Thank God. They asked if I wanted to involve the police, but I said no. There wasn't actual proof she had done anything. I just asked them not to give her another roommate. After unpacking in my new room, I remembered a few things. She had once told me that she'd had a previous roommate who didn't stay long, but she never said why. I also remembered one day she opened a locked drawer containing about 10 bottles of prescription medicine. She said it was for a skin issue. I wondered if that was true. Maybe she had another disorder, or maybe the medication had scary side effects. A few days later, I realized I had left a book and binder in her room. I didn't care much about the book, but she messaged me, asking me to come get it. I told her I needed to focus on school in my new room, but agreed to retrieve my things to avoid suspicion. My key still worked, so I went in. She wasn't there, and I sighed in relief. I grabbed my belongings and turned to leave. As I turned, she was standing in the doorway. I hadn't heard her unlock it. I smiled, trying to stay calm. She didn't say anything at first. I walked past her to leave. Then she asked, "Where sits your new room?" I told her it was on the first floor. She asked which hall, and I lied. She asked what it was near, the stairs, the front, the office, etc. I said I didn't remember, but she kept pressing. I lied again, saying it was near the stairs. I turned around and left, never seeing her again. I thought about telling her boyfriend, but I was too scared. I still think about it. Was I dreaming? Hallucinating? I don't think so, but it couldn't have been anyone else. Only we had keys. Maybe she was sleepwalking as a side effect of her medication, or maybe she was planning something sinister. My mom thinks she was testing how close she could get to me before I woke up, and that one morning she might have actually tried to choke me. I don't said no. It's in the past now, and I hope she never had another roommate again. This incident occurred during my time at university. I attended the University of Huddersfield from 2021 to 2023. It's not exactly known for its nightlife, so a lot of students end up spending late nights on campus, especially in the library or in academic buildings that stay open 24/7. I've never been the type to stay out late, but this happened during my last year when I had no choice. I was taking an advanced statistics class, and the professor was notorious for loading us with massive assignments. The deadline for one of the biggest projects was coming up, and I hadn't made nearly as much progress as I should have. My laptop had been giving me problems, so I decided to use the computers in the business building. The business building is a little isolated from the rest of campus, 3 stories tall, kind of old, and always unnervingly silent at night, like a sterile, empty shell. The computer lab on the 2nd floor was usually deserted after 9 p.m., which made it the perfect place to focus. That night, I got there around 10 o'clock. Campus was already dead quiet, and as soon as I stepped inside, I noticed how much colder it felt compared to outside. I swiped my student ID. I headed straight to the lab, booted up one of the computers, and started working. For a while, it was fine. The hum of the machine and the rhythm of my keyboard filled the silence. I kept glancing at the clock in the corner of the screen, reminding myself I'd leave before 1 a.m. But around 11:30, something strange happened. I was scrolling through data when I heard a door slam shut, somewhere down the hallway. It wasn't the front entrance. It came from deeper inside the building. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe it was the air system, or maybe a janitor had forgotten something, but then I remembered the janitors had already been through hours ago. By now, they'd be long gone. I tried to ignore it, and kept working, but then came the footsteps. Slow, heavy, each one echoing down the hallway, outside the lab. They weren't rushed, and they weren't faint. Whoever it was, they walked with purpose, like they wanted to be heard. I froze in my chair, staring at the computer screen, my heart in my throat, hoping they would just pass by. But instead, the steps stopped. Right outside the lab door. The door had a small window. If I leaned back, I could have looked through it, but I couldn't bring myself to move. I just sat there, holding my breath. After about 10 seconds, I heard the door handle rattle. Not just a light check. It was deliberate, forceful, like someone wanted me to know they were there, like they wanted to get in. My heart was pounding. The lab doors locked automatically after a certain time, so I knew they shouldn't be able to open it, but the way that handle kept shaking made me feel sick. Finally, after what felt like forever, maybe 30 seconds, the rattling stopped. The footsteps started again, slow, steady, fading down the hall, until they disappeared completely. I sat there in silence, debating whether I should just pack up and leave, but my project was due the next morning, and a part of me thought, maybe it was just another student messing around. I tried convincing myself of that, and went back to typing. Not even 10 minutes later, I heard it again. Footsteps. Only this time, they weren't coming from the hallway. They were above me. The ceiling in that building is made of those thin panels, where you can sometimes hear pipes rattle when the heat kicks on, but this wasn't pipes. This was the distinct sound of someone crawling or dragging themselves directly above the tiles. I froze, staring up, terrified of what I might see. One of the tiles shifted slightly, just enough for me to know there was weight pressing down on it. Then came a slow, deliberate creak, like someone carefully lowering themselves, trying not to be heard. That was enough for me. I yanked out my flash drive, shoved my notebook into my backpack, and bolted for the door. The second I stepped into the hallway, it felt like I'd walked into another world. The hall was dimly lit by buzzing fluorescent lights, and all I could hear was the squeak of my sneakers against the tiles. I walked fast, trying not to outright run. I reached the stairwell, shoved the door open, and started down. That steps, when I made the mistake of looking up. On the landing above me, just one floor up, there was a man. He wasn't a student, he wasn't a professor, he looked completely out of place. His clothes were baggy and torn. His face was half-shadowed, but his mouth hung open, stretched into an impossibly wide grin. He didn't move, he just stood there, staring down at me. I bolted. I flew down the stairs so fast, I almost tripped. I slammed through the first floor door and sprinted for the front entrance. My ID card barely registered fast enough to unlock it, but once it clicked, I shoved it open and ran across campus without looking back. I didn't stop until I was inside my dorm, door locked behind me, my back pressed against the wood as I tried to catch my breath. The next morning, I went back, only because I had to turn in my project. In the daylight, the business building felt like a completely different place. But then I saw it. One of the ceiling tiles was missing, the one directly above where I'd been working. Another was missing from the corner, the same tile I'd seen move. It was as though someone had been watching me work, rattled the door handle to mess with me, and when they couldn't get in, climbed back up into the ceiling to enter from there. I dread to think what would have happened if he'd managed to drop down into the lab before I ran. Needless to say, I bought a new laptop after that, and finished all my assignments from the safety of my dorm. My name is Annabelle. I'm 20 years old, from the UK. This happened when I was 16. What we call college here is high school for you. I'm about to tell you about the scariest day of my life. Sounds dramatic, I know, but you still see why. For context, my school used lanyards with ID cards. Anyone could walk into the foyer, but you could only go beyond if you scanned your ID at a screen, which unlocked the door into the school. The IDs had your photo and name on them, but a lot of kids flipped theirs around so you couldn't see the picture. You also needed your ID to open pretty much every door in the school, except for classrooms. It was a fairly new building, small in terms of student numbers, but large and imposing in appearance. A third of it was a special school for kids with learning disabilities. Another third was a nursery. The final third was the actual high school. I had just started at this school, and on the very first day we were all warned, do not let anyone into the building if you don't know them. The day this incident happened, it was the second week of school, but only my second full day there. I'd been sick most of the first week. It was geography day, class, all day long, and about halfway through the afternoon, maybe 20 minutes after lunch, things took a turn. I remember I'd drunk way too much juice from the cafeteria at lunch. We weren't allowed to bring drinks out of the cafeteria, and I had nowhere to put it without spilling, so I downed all of it before the bell. 20 minutes later, of course, I really needed to use the bathroom. I asked my teacher if I could go. We weren't usually allowed to leave during class, and he was visibly annoyed, especially since we'd just had break, but he could see I really needed to go. Eventually, he reluctantly agreed. This is important because at that time, almost nobody would be walking around the school, not even teachers. The hallways were always eerily empty during class hours. I left the classroom and pushed through a set of double doors into the cafeteria. Keep in mind, there was absolutely nobody in there at this point. I walked straight through into another large room with a second set of classrooms, used the bathroom, and then headed back into the cafeteria on my way to class. But when I stepped back through the doors, there was a man sitting at one of the tables. At first, it didn't seem that weird. Like I said, people don't usually walk around during class hours, but sometimes they do. I was out there too, after all. Still, I didn't know who he was. He was definitely too old to be a student, so I just assumed he was a teacher, or maybe a parent. I kept walking. Then he said, "Hey." I squealed. Literally, I seem a nervous, jumpy person anyway, and I wasn't sit expecting him to speak to me. I felt embarrassed, but he laughed and said, "Sorry, didn't sit mean to scare you." That's when I noticed he had a lanyard on. I immediately assumed he was a teacher. Looking back now though, I realized something was off. The ID badge was flipped over, so the face and name were hidden, just showing the blank backside of the card holder. Kids did that all the time at school. Scanners still worked, but it was unusual for a teacher. At the time I didn't think much of it. "I need some help getting some work things out of my car," he said. "Do you mind coming out with me for just a sec?" Without hesitation, I said, "Yeah, of course," still assuming he was staff. We walked out of the cafeteria in silence, through the foyer, and out of the building. That's when I noticed something strange. Teachers usually make small talk with you when they're walking somewhere with you, but he said nothing. He seemed nervous. His hands kept moving, first in his pockets, then clasped together. I'm really shy and not great at social situations, so I didn't speak either. The front of our school had an odd layout. From the entrance, it's about 50 meters, roughly 55 yards to the car park. You can't actually see the car park until you're right next to it, because thick bushes block the view. If you walk straight ahead, instead of turning, you'll end up off school property entirely. We were walking toward the car park in silence, when he finally said, "Yeah, my work stuff is in the boot. That sits what we call the trunk of a car in the UK. I said, "Got a few bags, so I just need you to help me carry a couple back inside." "Yeah, that sits fine," I replied. We reached the car park, and he said, "My car sits the blue one down at the end." As we got closer, I noticed something in the back seat, a shadow, then another. By the time we were just a few meters away, I realized there were at least 2 men hiding in the back seat. I froze. Instead of running, my brain just blanked. I guess they saw that I could see them, because the back door swung open, and a man scrambled out. At that exact moment, the man I thought was a teacher grabbed my arm, as I turned to run back toward the school. He was tall and heavy-set. For context, I'm 5'2", and quite underweight. I don't know how I managed it. Adrenaline, maybe, but I yanked my arm out of his grip with every ounce of strength I had, and started sprinting back to the building. I could hear multiple heavy footsteps pounding behind me. Thank God they stopped. If they had kept chasing, they would have caught me easily. The school's front doors were big, glass, and automatic. You had to wait for them to open. But maybe the glass doors felt risky to them. Someone could have walked by at any moment, because they didn't follow me in. I ran straight through the foyer, into the open cafe, which was attached to the library, and straight to the woman working there, out of breath, panicked. I told her what happened. She calmed me down, then walked with me to a teacher's office, and called my parents and the police. Security cameras in the parking lot caught everything. The men were arrested and charged with attempted kidnapping. Later we found out how he'd gotten inside the school. A student had dropped their lanyard outside, and he'd picked it up. That's why his ID was flipped, to hide the student's picture. I didn't go back to school for weeks after that. I'm still in therapy for the trauma. But writing this down, sharing it, helps me process it. This remains the scariest experience of my life.